Tonight I stood in my own hallway and heard my wife whisper into her phone, "I wish he'd disappear forever." So I granted her wish. I disappeared, legally. No shouting, no broken dishes, just paperwork, signatures, and silence. If you think that's petty, remember this. 5 years of overtime built the roof over her head, the Camry in our driveway, the ring on her finger. She didn't know I was home early, dust from the job site still on my boots, listening while she laughed about how small I am. Here's the part no one tells you. A man doesn't have to swing to hit back. He can vanish on the record. Deeds can change hands. Keys can stop turning. Phone numbers can die. In 3 weeks, she'd come home to strangers. But it all started in that hallway, with one sentence and a quiet decision. What would you do if the person you bled for wished you out of existence today? I'm Daniel Reed, union carpenter, 42, the kind of man who measures a day by splinters and mileage. 5 years married to Jessica. We bought a modest 2-story in Ohio with a gabled roof I could point to and say, "I paid for that ridge, nail by nail." I'm not special. I'm the guy who keeps the lights on, the mortgage current, the oil changed. I pack lunch in a dented cooler, kiss the same cheek, and climb the same ladder. My father worked the line. My back works the weekends. If you've ever held your breath when the card machine thinks a little too long, you know me. That week I was on overtime chasing rain before it warped a subfloor. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for sleep. But the thing about your life is, it never asks permission to happen. That night, mine arrived early, about 2 hours early, and waited for me on the other side of my own front door. I came home ahead of schedule because a pallet was short and the foreman waved us off. Sawdust still clung to my jeans, boots tracking a faint trail across the porch boards I'd replaced last summer. The house was quiet but not empty. It hummed with that soft electricity you feel when someone's around a corner. I reached for the knob, then heard it. Jessica's voice, low and bright, the voice she used for customer service and Christmas cards. I froze in the frame, thumb on cool metal, heart thudding like a nail gun. You can tell yourself you're mistaken. You can tell yourself you're paranoid. But when the laughter turns private and the words get sharp, denial runs out of places to hide. I leaned closer, breath held like a man underwater. The hallway smelled like her perfume and last night's candle wax. A floorboard creaked under my weight. I set my jaw, and then she said the sentence that split my life clean in half. "I wish he'd disappear forever." Even whispered, it cut through drywall. The kind of sentence that doesn't just land, it lodges. I felt it slide between my ribs and settle. She kept talking, steady, like she was ordering takeout. "I'm tired of his presence. He's so small next to you." Each word stacked like bricks, and I stood there while my marriage turned into a wall I couldn't climb. People imagine betrayal as fireworks. It isn't. It's paperwork in your chest. It's the slow folding of a chair no one plans to sit in again. I pictured our first Christmas, the cheap tree, her head on my shoulder while the game flickered on mute. I tried to fit that memory inside this sentence, and it wouldn't go. Somewhere a timer beeped, oven, phone, I couldn't tell, and she giggled, soft and harmless, like a bell at a church I no longer attended. I took my hand off the knob, and for the first time, I stopped trying to be reasonable. I stood there, dust on my cuffs, listening to a life I paid for being discussed like a restaurant she'd outgrown. Her laugh had champagne edges, mine had drywall dust. That contrast isn't poetry. It's the gap you feel at 11 p.m. when your knees lock up and the dishes still need doing. I've run my hands over beams that never complain. I've learned the weight a stud can carry when the span is just right. Funny how we never measure the spans in our homes until something sags. Jessica liked smooth things, marble counters, glass vases, hotel sheets. I liked reliable things, a truck that starts, a lock that turns, a promise that holds. That night I saw the blueprint I missed, how the finishes hid the cracks. And while she cooed into a phone about a life without me, I realized I couldn't compete with a fantasy. But a man can still choose how he leaves a building, and I knew then I wouldn't go through the front door. The first wave was heat, tight in the chest, the kind men call "I'm fine" until it isn't. I swallowed hard and felt that old temptation to storm in, to demand names, to make a scene big enough to feel like justice. But rage is a wrecking ball. It doesn't care what it hits. I thought about my father, who once told me, "The loudest men lose the most." He lost a pension shouting at the wrong boss. I lost a season shouting at a ref in a church league and still missed the winning shot. You learn. I pressed my palm flat to the door, felt the vibration of her voice, and realized I wanted something cleaner than payback. I wanted a life that didn't revolve around a person who wished I'd vanish. So I did a quiet, older man thing. I backed away. I stood in my own shadow and let my pulse slow. I wasn't going to win this with volume. I was going to win it with a plan. Before plans come memories, whether you invite them or not. I saw our apartment with the rattling radiator, the way winter fogged the windows while we ate boxed macaroni on upturned moving crates. She wore my hoodie then, sleeves past her hands, and called us scrappy. We counted quarters for gas. I picked up Saturday shifts and pretended it didn't hurt. We laughed easy, like we were both in on the same secret. I bought that Camry used, cleaned the stain out of the trunk, hid the keys in a box of her favorite chocolates. She shrieked and kissed my face and cried. In the picture from that night, I look like a man who just learned the recipe for joy. Maybe we both did. Maybe we forgot it. People say marriages die slow. I think they die in small, polite ways. Missed dinners, muted shows, headphones on. The past tried to talk me out of the present. It failed. I remembered who I was before her, and I started to remember him on purpose. My hand found the knob again, rough thumb on smooth metal, as if there were two versions of me negotiating a truce. One wanted to burst in, one wanted to walk. The older one won. I looked down at my knuckles, split from a day of lifting LVLs, and thought about what those hands were for: holding, building, signing, not breaking. The hallway light threw a long shadow across the entry rug Jessica picked from a catalog I pretended to care about. I stepped back into that shadow and let it cover me like a stage curtain. If you've ever stood outside a hospital room, not ready to see what's inside, you know the choreography. 1 breath, 2 steps, retreat. I did that dance with my own front door. Then I turned away. The house behind me was still warm. The night air had teeth. I chose teeth, because some thresholds you cross by leaving, and that's exactly what I did. Quietly, deliberately, with my keys still in my pocket. I sat in my chair that evening like a man in a museum staring at artifacts from a life he only dimly remembers. Jessica poured a glass of wine, legs tucked under a throw, and asked how my day was. I said long, and meant over. The TV whispered. The clock banged out seconds like roofing nails. It's strange, the way a familiar room can feel staged. The magazine on the coffee table, the blanket just so, the candle trimmed, props in a play where I'd been recast as background. I watched her scroll. I watched myself not ask questions. The old me would have poked, pried, pleaded. The new me was taking inventory: truck title, house deed, bank pin, union contact, lawyer's card from a buddy who needed it last year. I wasn't hunting for proof anymore. I was gathering tools. When she finally yawned, I'm wiped, I smiled and told her to sleep. And in that soft domestic silence, I started drawing my exit on the back of my heart. The decision arrived without fanfare. No slammed doors, no speeches. It showed up the way dawn shows up, quiet and undeniable. I would disappear, but not the way she pictured. I'd vanish on the record. The plan wrote itself in plain words: sell the house, move the assets I could, file the papers, clear the air. She wanted space? I'd give her the whole map. I brushed my teeth, stared at a face that suddenly looked 10 pounds lighter, and said nothing. In bed, I lay on my side of a mattress I'd paid for, listening to the soft rhythm of a woman already living somewhere else in her mind. I didn't try to join her there. I turned inward and found something steadier, self-respect with a steel edge. Men my age don't need fireworks. We need finality. Before sleep found me, I pictured keys that wouldn't turn and a note anyone could read. Tomorrow, I'd start. And 3 weeks from now, she'd understand exactly what disappear can mean. Morning came like it always does. Coffee, boots by the door, the weather on low. I moved through the kitchen the way men my age do when we're keeping the peace. Rinse the mug, wipe the counter, fix the crooked dish towel. I asked Jessica if she slept okay. She said fine without looking up. I nodded like that word still meant something. At work, we say plum when a wall is true. Nothing in that kitchen felt plum. Still, I kept my voice steady, the way my father did when the dog chewed his best boots. Pretend normal until normal packs its bags. I texted the crew I'd be late. Union paperwork, I wrote. Then sat at the table and made a list on a legal pad. Realtor, attorney, bank. If you're over 30, you know the comfort of a list. You know the power of crossing out a line. I finished my coffee, tucked the pad under the newspaper, and smiled like a man with no plans at all. Dinner felt like a staged photo. Plates centered, silverware lined like soldiers. Jessica twirled pasta and cleared her throat the way people do before they quit a job. "I need a break," she said. "Time for myself. A solo trip." She spoke like a travel ad. Quiet mornings, beaches, reset. I held my fork like a question. Men my age know the speech. You hear it from buddies at the shop, from brothers-in-law at barbecues. The part where they say, "Time for me," and you realize you've been an extra in your own house. I sipped water, steady hands, and let her finish. Silence rolled in between us like fog across a field. When the dishwasher kicked on, she finally looked at me, waiting for a fight. I gave her none. "If that's what you need," I said, voice flat as drywall. Her shoulders dropped with relief. Mine didn't. I stacked our plates. The climax was quiet. I didn't argue, and that told me who I was now. After dinner, I walked the block. Old habit. The neighbor, Tom, watered his lawn like a man saving a season. We traded the usual nod. I thought about how men keep moving when our hearts stall. Trash to the curb, gas in the mower, mailbox checked. Back inside, Jessica scrolled flights, the glow from her screen painting her face a color I didn't recognize. 3 weeks, she said. Good for you, I answered, and meant it in a way she wouldn't catch. Emptiness can be loud, but that night it was surgical. I opened the hall closet, touched the suitcase we bought on sale, and pictured it rolling away without me. In the bathroom mirror, I saw the man I grew up to be. A little gray at the temples, knuckles rough, eyes tired but clear. That clarity was the pivot. I crawled into bed and gave her my back, kind, steady, final. The mini-climax was a single nod in the dark, permission granted, to both of us. The next days turned practical in that way men understand. Lists, receipts, timing. Jessica hummed while she packed new sundresses and a straw hat she said was vacation essential. I kept my voice friendly and my eyes elsewhere. I folded 2 shirts for her and remembered folding drywall tape, how you crease it first so it sits right. She laid out 3 bikinis on our bed like options in a life I didn't live in. The camera on my phone caught a photo of her suitcase by accident. Zipper half open, perfume bottles wrapped in socks. You'd be surprised what small images your brain saves when the big picture hurts. She told me her itinerary without asking for mine. I rehearsed simple sentences in my head. Leave the spare key. Text when you land. She didn't notice the spare key was already on my ring. The climax snuck up on me while I zipped her bag. I realized I could love someone and still lock them out. Helping her pack was like framing a wall you know you'll demo later. Square, careful, temporary. I weighed each item in my hand. The paperback she wouldn't read, the sandals she'd only wear once, the travel-size lotion that always leaks. Older men know the feel of wasted money. We also know when to let it go. I slid the suitcase scale under the handle and said 47. She kissed my cheek like a tip. You're the best, she murmured, and for a second I wanted to be. Instead, I took a breath and checked my own bag. Titles, registration, marriage certificate, a union contact scribbled on a napkin from years back. I tucked the legal pad beside my tool catalog. It fit perfectly. The climax of that minute was simple and solid as a stud. I had everything I needed to build an exit, and for once, I wasn't overpacking hope. Airport morning. The highway was a gray ribbon, the truck a quiet drum. We didn't say much. Couples rarely do when the map between them is already drawn. At departures, I lifted her suitcase to the curb and felt the old pull in my shoulder, the one from the time I misjudged a joist. Don't wait up, she joked. I smiled like a porch light. She kissed my cheek, polite, practiced, and walked toward sliding doors that always open for strangers. I parked and went inside anyway, stood behind glass, and watched her inch through the TSA line, hand over ID, wave at no one. Men in my age bracket know that glass. Hospital windows, nursery windows, courtroom windows. You stand there and accept what you can't touch. Her plane lifted into a sky the color of primer. My phone buzzed. Boarding. I typed, "Be safe." The climax was clean as a cut. I let the notification fade, then turned and walked into the life I was choosing. Out on the garage ramp, I breathed like a man who'd been holding it too long. The truck door thunked shut with that solid sound older vehicles make, the kind you trust. I watched the plane climb to a dot, then nothing. Ever close a window in winter and feel the room go still? That's what my chest did. I drove without music, letting the road noise sand the edges off my thoughts. At a red light, I pictured 3 weeks as a blueprint, mark the load-bearing walls, remove the rest. Back home, I walked through rooms like a buyer, not an owner. Square footage, light, flow. It was all usable. It was all leaving. On the counter, I wrote 3 calls on a sticky note. Realtor, attorney, broker. I stuck it on the fridge where save-the-date magnets used to live. The climax was a key in my palm. I turned it, locked the door from the outside, and for the first time, the house didn't argue. Keller Williams sat in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax place where the sign still said, "We e-file." I liked that. Real life. The receptionist offered coffee in a paper cup with a lipstick mark that wasn't mine, and I said yes to both the coffee and the imperfection. The agent, navy blazer, sensible shoes, shook my hand like she meant it. I told her I needed to move fast. Men over 30 know fast costs, but slow costs more. We walked the house together. She spoke in numbers that didn't scare me. Comps, days on market, cash buyers. I heard a language I could finally use. Back at her desk, she slid the listing agreement across the oak. The pen felt heavier than it looked. I read every line, like I read lumber stamps for grade. Then I signed. The climax wasn't the signature. It was the way my shoulders dropped after, as if the roof I'd been holding up with my spine finally found a beam. The photographer came by noon with a lens that made the living room look bigger than it ever felt. I stood out of frame, a ghost in my own house, while he said, "One more, great." The agent planted a red and white sign that said, "What I couldn't, for sale." I ran my hand over the post the way men check a fence line, testing for wobble. Solid. In the kitchen, I pulled the deed from a folder and thought about the day we signed our names side by side, how we both leaned in like we were pushing the same car out of a ditch. This time, I was pushing alone, and it rolled easier. On my phone, I drafted a text to the auto broker about the Camry, hesitated, and hit send. He wrote back in 5 minutes. Bring title. The climax was a number on the agent's screen. Listing live. The house wasn't ours anymore. It belonged to the market, a place where feelings don't get a vote. Driving away, I felt the ache in the air at the same time, like taking off a tight boot after a 12-hour shift. Pain, then relief, then a careful step. I parked by the lake where guys my age walk laps after doctor visits and bad news. A man fed ducks with stale bread. A kid threw pebbles and missed the water half the time. Life kept doing what it does. I called the lawyer from the bench, voice calm, words simple, and scheduled the appointment. Then I sat with my palms on my knees and let the wind decide what stayed on me. If you've ever cleaned out a garage, you know the feeling. You touch everything once and choose. I chose me. Back home, I took one last slow lap through the rooms and whispered goodbye to nothing in particular. The climax of that minute wasn't dramatic. It was a door closing behind me, latch catching, and a man walking forward without looking back. The courthouse smelled like polish and old paper, the kind of place where lives become folders. I took the elevator up with a man in a suit and a woman holding a baby carrier. Everybody headed somewhere official. The clerk pointed me to family division. The sign didn't blink. I sat across from a receptionist who had a voice like a librarian, calm, practiced, not unkind. "Petition for dissolution?" she asked. I nodded, handed over my ID, and watched her stamp a date that would outlast any anniversary we had left. A legal assistant led me to a small conference room with a chipped table and two pens that didn't match. "Your attorney will be right in." The door clicked. I stared at the wall clock and thought about how many times I'd checked a level to make sure it read true. This, at least, was true. When the lawyer walked in, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered forms. And I realized I preferred forms. He opened a leather folder and asked the questions that sort a life into boxes. "Any kids?" "No." "Joint accounts?" "No." "Shared property besides the marital home?" "No." He didn't blink. He just wrote. If you've ever cleaned out a garage, you know that rhythm. Keep, toss, donate. We were mostly toss. He explained timelines in simple English, no Latin, no show. File today, serve later, wait for the stamp that means the state agrees. I thought of all the stamps I trusted. Grade stamps on lumber, union stamps on checks, passport stamps back when we believed the world would widen for us. He asked about fault, and I shrugged. I didn't need the court to measure what my ears already knew. He slid a stack across the table, pages with headings that sounded clinical for something this personal. Read, initial, sign where marked. I took the pen. My hands weren't steady, but my answers were. There's a focus that shows up when a man knows the job he's doing matters. I read every line like I was checking joists in a ceiling that would hold someone's kids. My name appeared, then hers, then the blank spaces where we used to be. The pen scratched the way a hand plane sounds shaving a door that's stuck. Soft, decisive. I initialed paragraphs I never thought I'd need, signed next to a date that made everything official, and exhaled in a way I hadn't since the hallway. The lawyer gathered the papers with the neatness of a barber folding a towel. "We'll file this afternoon," he said. "You'll get stamped copies." He slid me a card with the case number. I slid it into my wallet behind my union card, the two rectangles touching like strangers who'd become neighbors. As I stood, the chair legs squeaked. The sound felt too loud for a moment this quiet. The climax was simple. When I walked out, I was leaving as only me. Next stop was the broker's lot off the frontage road, the one with faded flags and a coffee machine that makes everything taste like hazelnut. The Camry idled smooth, a good car that never asked for much. I remembered hiding those keys in a box of chocolates. Her laugh, the kiss, the way she hopped in and ran her hand over the dash like she'd found gold. The broker tapped the tires, checked lights, skimmed the maintenance log I kept too carefully. "Clean title, fair miles. We'll list it today." He named a number that felt both smaller than I'd hoped and bigger than I feared. That's adulthood in one sentence. I signed again, different papers, different loss. He shook my hand and said, "We'll call when it sells." I watched the Camry roll into a line of other cars waiting to be someone else's story. The climax landed like a lug nut in a tray. The gift I gave her was no longer mine to protect. I climbed into my F-150, the seat molded to my shape, the kind of truck you measure time in, not miles. The door shut with a solid thunk you don't get anymore. I sat a minute and ran my palm over the steering wheel, feeling the smooth spots where a decade of commutes had polished the rubber. This was the real thing left. Honest, loud, a little dented. Men my age understand the comfort of a machine that always starts. I turned the key and listened to that old V8 catch like a loyal dog. As I pulled onto the road, I caught my reflection in the side mirror. Eyes clearer than last week, jaw set the way it gets when you carry drywall upstairs alone. I drove past places we used to stop, her bakery, the park with the fountain, and didn't stop. The climax wasn't dramatic. It was a gear shift, firm and final. I left the lot certain of one small, solid truth. I was driving my life again. That night, the house echoed in a way it never had. Without her shoes by the door and her shows on low, you could hear the refrigerator hum like a distant highway. I sat in my chair and let the quiet sort me. Older men know this ritual. Lights low, feet up, no music, just the day settling. Memory is a pushy guest. It brought photos I didn't ask for. Laughs in borrowed cabins, burned pancakes on birthdays, her sleeping with the TV glow on her face. The quiet didn't feel empty, it felt honest. I took the framed wedding picture off the shelf and set it face down on the table, the way you do when you're painting a room and don't want dust on the glass. I wasn't breaking anything. I was protecting what was left. The climax arrived as a single practical movement. I stood, pulled a box from the closet, and labeled it with a black marker. Jessica. The ink didn't smudge. The ring memory was clean and bright, like a bulb you forgot you replaced. I see the jewelry counter under fluorescent lights, the clerk's kind eyes when I asked about payment plans. The band wasn't big. The promise was. I put it in a velvet box I kept in my sock drawer for a month. On the night I asked, we ate cheap Italian and split a cannoli because we were counting dollars. I walked her to the Riverwalk, palms sweating despite the cold, and she said yes before I finished the sentence. She cried the good kind of tears, the kind men replay when bills stack up and hours run long. I replayed it now and felt two truths at once. We were real then, and we are over now. I set the ring box I'd saved, empty, ridiculous, on top of the Jessica box. The climax wasn't nostalgia. It was mercy. I let the past be happy without letting it hold me hostage. The foolishness came in waves, how I missed the signs, how I explained away late nights as spin class and unreturned texts as busy. Men don't like to admit we were the last to know. It feels like losing twice. I thought of the time I chased a squeak in my truck for a month before noticing the loose jack sliding under the seat. The noise wasn't the problem. The thing I refused to look at was. I sat on the stairs and gave myself the talk I'd give a nephew. You weren't dumb. You were loyal. Those are not the same. I listed what loyalty cost me. Birthdays missed for overtime, weekends spent fixing, not resting, a heart that always split the check. Then I listed what foolishness taught me. Boundaries, patience, better questions. The climax was a new rule I said out loud, to the banister, to the empty hall, to anyone listening. Next time, I don't ignore the squeak. Pain, when it's done flailing, hardens. It doesn't make you cruel. It makes you precise. I felt it happen the way concrete sets, slow, then suddenly you can walk on it. I sharpened small things, how I answered texts, how I guarded mornings, how I spent money with my name on it. I cleaned the workbench, tossed rusted bits I'd been saving, just in case, and kept the tools that cut straight. My phone lit up with an email from the realtor, first showing scheduled. My chest didn't spike, it steadied. Men my age know the difference between adrenaline and resolve. One burns you out, the other builds a road. I made copies of what mattered, titles, receipts, the note I knew I'd write last. The climax wasn't me getting tougher. It was me getting clearer. I wasn't punishing Jessica. I was protecting Daniel. That's not vengeance. That's stewardship. With the showings booked and the Camry in line to sell, the calendar took shape like a job schedule. Week 1, list and file. Week 2, pack and transfer. Week 3, deliver and disappear. I called my oldest friend, the one who helped me move a washer up a nightmare staircase, and asked for a Saturday. He didn't ask why. He just said, "I'll bring straps." We walked room to room on the phone, what to box, what to donate, what to leave. I printed labels big enough to read without glasses. I set a fresh pad on the counter and wrote the last item on the last page. Note. It sat there like a nail waiting for a hammer. If you've ever prepped a house for sale, you know the rhythm. Everything looks worse before it looks done. The climax was a feeling I could finally name. When she came home, she wouldn't find a fight. She'd find a finished job, and that would say everything. I called Mike, the friend who once hauled a washer with me up a staircase that turned twice and hated us both. He didn't ask for details. Men like us read tone before words. "Saturday," he said. "I'll bring straps and a dolly." We set a time that fit around his kids' soccer and my open house. I made coffee extra strong the morning he came, the kind that tastes like decisions. We walked the rooms like firefighters, not sentimental, just systematic. "Bedroom first," I said. He nodded. "We've moved enough couches to know. Start with what's heavy while you're fresh." He cracked a joke about my label maker. I laughed because it felt good to have one thing in the house that clicked into place. The climax was small but steady. When he gripped the first box and said, "You ready?" I said yes, and meant it all the way down to my boots. Dresses first, then heels, then the glass bottle perfumes that always look like trophies. I folded each dress like it might break, a habit from years of protecting what I paid for. The heels clacked together in the box like a reminder that some sounds are pretty until they're not. I wrapped the perfumes in yesterday's newspaper, the sports page, and the coupons, making a winter coat for summer scents. If you're over 30, you know the ritual. Wrap, tape, label, stack. It keeps your hands busy while your head catches up. I found the cardigan she wore that first Christmas when the heat went out and we sat under blankets watching our breath. I almost put it aside. I didn't. It went into the same box as the sundresses, seasons stacked like past decisions. The climax landed with the last strip of tape, the lid shut and stayed shut. That box wasn't a maybe anymore. It was done. Every object felt like a sentence in a story I already knew the ending to. The clutch from the wedding we never attended, the passport case with no stamps, the bracelet I couldn't afford until the bonus hit. People think stuff is just junk. It isn't. It's proof of effort, of taste, of time spent saying yes. I tucked a silk scarf around a jewelry tray and thought about the weekends I chose overtime over fishing, the mornings I chose drywall over sleep. Each fold was a reminder I wasn't crazy. I was committed. There's a difference. I placed her favorite perfume on top, the one that makes a hallway smell like a commercial, and closed the flaps. The box felt heavier than its contents. That's the math of love. Weight you can't see. The climax came when I wrote her name on the side in thick black marker. It wasn't a threat. It was a receipt. The label maker clicked like a metronome. Bedroom, Jessica. Bathroom, Jessica. Living room, decor. I made the letters big enough to read without my glasses because I've learned to be kind to the man I'll be in 10 years. I numbered boxes, drew arrows for this side up, and taped the corners twice. Men my age know the pleasure of a neat stack. Wood, boxes, bills, things that line up when so much doesn't. Mike called from the stairs. "These go to the truck or your friends?" "Friends," I said, thinking of the storage stop before we deliver to her parents. I printed one special label for a suitcase I kept off to the side. Important. Deliver last. The climax of this minute was simple and exact. The house had a new language, labels and arrows, and I was fluent. For once, everything pointed where it should. I set an open suitcase on the bed, the wheels facing the door like it already wanted to leave. Inside, I laid a manila envelope, divorce papers, stamped and crisp, as carefully as a man sets a level before the first cut. On top, I placed a sheet of heavy stock I bought at the office supply store because a message like this shouldn't curl. My pen hovered, then landed. Older hands write slower, but the words come truer. I rehearsed the note in my head the way I rehearse measurements, twice. My phone buzzed with a text from the realtor about a second showing. I silenced it. This moment needed quiet. I tucked the envelope under the straps, smoothed the lining, and zipped halfway. The climax was the sound of that zipper stopping. Not open, not closed, like a lid waiting for truth. I wrote the sentence without flourish. "You wanted me gone. Now you have your wish." I signed my first name, not because I was hiding, but because that's how we spoke when things were good. Daniel. The letters looked like they did on birthday cards and sticky notes on the fridge. A part of me wanted to add more, to explain, to justify, to list every late night and slight. Men love a list when we're hurting. I didn't. I set the pen down and let the white space do the talking. Mike walked by the door, saw the suitcase, and nodded once like a man who has seen men do hard, necessary things. I slid the note beneath the envelope's flap so it would be the first thing she touched. The climax was restraint. I left the rest of the page blank. The closet sounded different when it was almost empty, hangers clicking like wind chimes in a storm that already passed. I pulled our wedding photo off the wall, the glass cool against my palms. We looked like a couple with a map and a full tank. I popped the back, slid the photo out, and left the frame. There's a mercy in not smashing things you once loved. I wrapped the picture in craft paper and taped the edges like a present for no one. On the top shelf, I found the box of invitations we never mailed for a party we never had. I set them with the rest. Then I wiped the shelf with a rag because that's what I do when I finish a job, clean the surface. The climax came when the closet rod showed through, bare and straight. It held nothing. And somehow, it held me. By late afternoon, the house had that hollow sound you only hear in moving days, and after arguments you can't take back. Footsteps echoed. The echo answered. Sunlight fell across blank walls like they were waiting to be picked by strangers. Mike stood in the living room, hands on hips, and said, "You sure?" I didn't need to look around. I felt the answer in my spine. We carried the last box outside, and for a second I saw the rooms as they were when we first walked in. Hopeful, smaller than we pretended, big enough anyway. I locked the back door and tugged twice, habit from years of second-guessing. It held. The climax wasn't the emptiness. It was the order. Every room had a job again, to be done. At the final walkthrough, the agent clicked through on her tablet, checking boxes like a pilot before takeoff. "Keys?" she asked. I slid the ring across the counter. Front door, back door, garage, mailbox. Each one clinking a little goodbye. She handed me a spare lockbox code and a folder with copies of everything. Paper feels heavier on days like this. "We're in good shape," she said. The sign out front flapped in a breeze that smelled like rain. I took one last look at the place I had made true with sweat and weekends. Not a shrine, not a ruin, just a house ready for its next name. The climax sat in my palm, a single extra key I kept on purpose. I dropped it in her hand and walked out lighter by ounces that felt like pounds. We strapped the last suitcase into Mike's SUV and shook on a Saturday well spent. He drove off toward the storage unit, tail lights blinking twice like a promise kept. I climbed into my F-150 and let the seat remember me. The town unspooled in the rear view, the diner where coffee tastes like 1998, the parts store that still sells belts from behind the counter, the church that rings on the quarter hour. Men my age count time in places. I turned onto the highway without checking the radio. The hum filled the cab, steady as a heartbeat during a good sleep. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I let the mile markers do the talking. At the county line, a hawk lifted off a fence post like it had been waiting on my cue. The climax was quiet and complete. I passed the now leaving sign, and for the first time in years, I believed it. I wasn't at the airport, but I know the rhythm of arrivals. Wheels kiss the runway, cabin lights pop on, everyone reaches for a phone. Later I saw the timestamp on her landed text to her mother and the photo of the baggage claim carousel like proof the world still spins. Cleveland looked the same as always, steel sky, lake wind, a squeeze of traffic, but the ground under her had shifted. She didn't feel it yet. That's how consequences work. They lag like a weak cell signal. She rolled her carry-on past the Welcome to Cleveland mural I've walked by a dozen times after funerals and cheap vacations. Men my age know that mural. It's a smile that doesn't know your news. She ordered a ride share, tipped automatically, and thought the hard part was over. The climax of this minute lives in that gap between landing and learning. She had returned to the old address. The address had moved on. The driver took the shortcut I always use, past the ball fields and the diner that smells like pancakes all day. She texted a friend a sun emoji and typed home, assuming I was doing what I always did, waiting, porch light on. That's the story about men like me. People forget we can end chapters too. I picture her watching familiar blocks go by like beads on a string. The neighbor with the crooked mailbox, the red maple we planted the first fall, the corner where I patched a pothole myself. She would have smiled then, small, confident, the smile of someone who believes the world pauses when they need time. The car turned onto our street. Her hand probably found the house key in her purse without looking. Men over 30 know that reach by heart. It's muscle memory. The climax was still out of frame, waiting where driveways meet answers. The driver idled by the curb while Jessica pulled her suitcase handle and stepped onto the sidewalk that knows our shoe sizes. The house faced her the way it always had. Same roofline, same door, different life. A silver SUV she didn't recognize sat in the driveway, clean and level, no dent where I once misjudged a ladder. She would have frowned the way people do when a chair is out of place. Her eyes would move fast. New doormat, planters that weren't ours, curtains the color of oatmeal instead of navy. If you've ever come back to a job site after the crew changed shifts, you know the feeling, the same outline, but someone else's hands. She probably waved the driver off with a, Thanks, I'm good, because confidence is a habit. The climax was the smallest click in the world. Key meets lock, and the lock doesn't care. She tried again. People always do. Turn the key harder. Tilt the wrist. Whisper a little prayer. Locks speak one language, and it isn't hope. The metal bit. Refused. Bit again. Her suitcase tipped as she leaned her weight into a door that no longer answered to her touch. If you're over 30, you've met this moment. In hospitals, in offices, at gravesides, when something that used to open stays shut. I can see her knuckles whitening, the set of her jaw, the heat rising behind her eyes. She looked over her shoulder, maybe to see if any neighbor was watching, because pride wants privacy. Then the door handle turned from the inside. Not by me. Not by anyone she knew. The climax arrived in a simple swing and a soft voice that belonged to a stranger. A woman with a baby on her hip stood in the doorway, the kind of tired smile new parents wear like a badge. "Can I help you?" she asked, polite, cautious, measuring. Jessica said the line I once believed, "This is my house." The woman shook her head, gentle but sure. "We just bought it. Closed 3 days ago." Babies don't care about paperwork, but I do. I'd seen the emails, the transfer, the stamp. For Jessica, that sentence would hit like winter through a cracked window. She'd glance past the woman and see a couch where ours wasn't, a rug we never owned, a picture of a baby where our wedding photo used to hang. If you've ever walked into your own name and found it moved, you know the wobble in your knees. The climax was a step backward, hers, pulled by gravity and the truth. She dragged the suitcase back down the stoop, wheels clacking against the grain I sanded last spring. There's a sound to leaving you don't forget. It's smaller than footsteps and louder than pride. The woman at the door held the baby tighter, then closed the door the way you do when you're still new to a place. Gentle, careful, twice. Jessica stood on the walk like someone doing math without numbers. Men my age have seen that stare in parking lots after layoffs and on porches after goodbyes. She looked left and right as if the street might cough up an answer. It didn't. She pulled the handle, the suitcase obeyed, and she moved because bodies must. The climax was a simple decision with no mystery. When your key fails, your phone becomes your next door. She called me first. I know because my carrier log shows 3 attempts that never rang through. The message she heard is one I set up myself. Number, not in service. Not a block. An obituary. There's a difference. She tried again. Panic makes loops. Older men know the power of turning a page clean. Sometimes you have to remove the old bookmarks. I imagine her thumb hovering, the tiny waver in breath before a call that might fix everything. It didn't. I had shut the door on that route on purpose. People say silence is cruel. I think it's clear. The climax was what didn't happen. No answer, no voicemail, just the quiet that follows a burn when the nerves stop firing. Parents are the next instinct, even when you're grown. She called her mother, voice tight, words tumbling. "There are strangers in my house." The kind of sentence that feels untrue even while you say it. I picture her standing by their mailbox, the one I set plumb with a post hole digger and 2 bags of Quikrete, as if the thing could balance her. Her mother listened, mothers specialize in that, and said, "Come home." Men my age have been on both ends of those calls. The son who needs a couch for a while, the dad who says, "We'll figure it out." The driver looped back because the app told him to. Algorithms know when a trip isn't finished. The climax was her climb into the back seat again, the door shutting on a life that wouldn't open. "Come home, we'll show you," her father added on speaker, the kind of steady a good dad saves for bad days. Indiana isn't far if you're chasing comfort, but it's a different state when you're chasing what's gone. She gave the address with a voice that tried to be formal and failed. The driver set the route. The car drew a blue line across a map that had once been ours. I've driven that line for Thanksgiving and for arguments we pretended were about pie. She pressed her forehead to cool glass the way people do to lower a fever. Out past the city, the fields started, the Midwestern kind that holds seasons like secrets. The climax wasn't a revelation. It was an agreement she didn't know she'd made. She would see what I left, and she would understand it without my voice. The highway widened, then narrowed, the way every long drive does. She scrolled through old photos, vacations, birthdays, dinners that looked happier in pixels than they felt in person. Men over 30 know that trick. We keep pictures of the good minutes like receipts to argue with regret. The sun sat low, flattening barns and water towers into cutouts. Somewhere in that golden hour, confidence gave way to something older. Fear, maybe grief, maybe both riding shotgun. She texted her mother, "Almost there," and got a heart back, because parents don't always have better tools. The driver turned off the interstate, followed the smaller signs, and rolled onto the street where her parents' porch light has been steady for years. The climax paused on the curb with the meter, a suitcase on the walk, a key that would still fit this door, and a daughter who was about to learn the difference between being left and being let go. I wasn't in Indiana, but Mike was. He texted me a photo from the driveway. Porch light steady, front door open, familiar welcome mat. Inside, her parents' hallway smelled like coffee and old wood polish, the way Midwestern houses do when they've seen winters and weddings. He set the suitcases in a neat row along the wall, handles out, tags facing up, because order is a kindness when your world tilts. Her mother whispered thanks the way mothers do, with hands on her heart. Her father checked the latches like a man who fixes what he can reach. When Jessica stepped over the threshold, the air changed. You can tell by the pause, foot half raised, breath caught. She saw her life arranged respectfully, not dumped. That matters. It says this wasn't revenge, it was resolution. The climax was silent and unmistakable. She recognized my handwriting on a luggage tag and knew, before touching anything, that this room held answers her phone couldn't. On the dining table, we'd stacked the cardboard with care, medium boxes, taped clean, black marker across each panel like road signs. Jessica, kitchen. Jessica, bath. Closet, shoes. My handwriting rides a little uphill. It always has. Her father traced the letters with his finger the way men read part numbers at the parts store. Her mother started to fuss over labels. "We should move these." And he said softly, "Let her see it as it is." Men my age know that tone. It's the voice you use when the truth will hurt, but help. Jessica set her purse on a chair she grew up climbing on, and for the first time since the airport, she didn't reach for her phone. Names on boxes do a thing screens can't. They place you. The climax arrived as recognition written in ink. This wasn't a threat, a rumor, or a test. It was logistics. And logistics don't lie. Her hands shook the way hands do when they haven't caught up to the heart. She crouched beside the first suitcase, the blue one we bought on clearance when we thought deals were destiny, and slid the zipper tab slow, like any sudden sound might break her future. If you're over 30, you've opened boxes after funerals, after moves, after kids leave. You know the holy hush of cardboard and cloth. The lid gave and the scent rose, lavender dryer sheets, familiar and foreign all at once. She touched the folded cardigan on top, then paused, as if fabric could explain time. Her mother took a step she didn't finish. Her father stayed still, an anchor withholding the rope. Jessica looked up, eyes glassy, then back down at her own life, compacted to fit airline limits. The climax lived in the tiny decision to keep going, fingers under the lining flap, searching for the thing that would either save her or end the searching. She found the manila envelope where I left it, centered, flat, as deliberate as a level set on a beam. Manila is a serious color, it doesn't pretend. She pinched the clasp and felt that stubborn little metal give, the sound small and final. If you've ever opened tax letters or test results at a kitchen table, you know the gravity an envelope can hold. On the outside, I'd written nothing, no instructions, no drama, just the weight of what waits inside. Her mother's breath went shallow. Her father's jaw worked once. Jessica slid the flap back, and for a heartbeat the room paused with her. Men my age have stood over shoulders in moments like this, wishing we could take the paper and read it for them. You can't. The climax was tactile and undeniable. Cardstock against fingers, edges square, the future folded in thirds. She drew the papers out and there it was. Petition, case number, the clerk's raised stamp that turns words into law. My signature rode the line it belonged on, clean and legible, like I wanted the court, and her, to know there was no tremor left in me. Divorce documents are oddly calm. Headings and sections, boxes checked, a route through grief written in Courier. She flipped the top page, and the quiet got heavier in that way only official language can make it. Older folks know this hush. The hospital consent, the mortgage, the retirement rollover. Even when you'd rather scream, you read. Jessica read. Her lips moved like she needed sound to carry meaning. Her mother's hand reached for a chair back. Her father looked at the date and understood the planning. The climax wasn't the stamp. It was the realization stamped under it. This had begun the day she wished me gone. On top, tucked where the fingers would find it first, I'd placed the note. Heavy stock. No flourish. You wanted me gone. Now you have your wish. I signed Daniel, the way you sign when you remember the good seasons but don't live there anymore. Men love to add paragraphs when we're hurt. I left white space. Let the sentence breathe. Let the truth do its own work. Jessica's eyes caught on the words like a sleeve on a nail. She read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition might change the ending. It didn't. Her mother covered her mouth. Her father didn't move. If you've ever said a hard sentence out loud and then sat in the echo, you know the shape of that room. The climax was restraint, mine, delivered in 10 plain words that carried more weight than any speech I could have made. The sound she made next wasn't pretty or polite. It ripped. Grief talks in frequencies neighbors hear through walls. She sank to the rug, knees first, palms flat, the note and the papers skittering like leaves in a gust. People will tell you this is drama. Older men know better. That scream was the exact size of the distance between what she expected and what was real. Her mother moved, because mothers do, but her father lifted his hand, a quiet stop sign that wasn't cold, just necessary. You can't catch a falling person with a hug they haven't asked for. Jessica's forehead touched the suitcase lid we'd worn smooth in airports and hotel rooms. The climax was the collapse, the body admitting what the mind had been dodging since the driveway. Doors had closed, and none of them were mine to open. Her mother's instinct said, go. Her father's wisdom said, wait. He didn't harden. He steadied, a man who has learned that some pains must land to finish. Let her have it, he whispered, eyes glossy, voice low. If you've raised kids to adulthood, you know that line, the one between saving and stealing the lesson. He stood sentry while the storm passed through his daughter's chest. Her mother shifted her weight, hands clasped, praying quietly the way people do when words aren't big enough. Minutes stretched the way they do in waiting rooms and church pews. The house held. The boxes held. The envelope stayed open like a mouth that had said enough. The climax ran along a simple sentence that didn't have to be spoken. She was being allowed to meet the truth standing up, even if she reached it on her knees. Tears slow down eventually. Even rivers have calmer bends. Jessica sat back against the couch that wasn't ours, breathing in counts, hands empty because there was nothing to hold that wouldn't burn. Around her, the luggage waited, practical, patient, honest. If you've ever moved out of a life, you know how suitcases become mirrors. She saw the cost in zippers and labels and ink that didn't smudge. My name wasn't in the room, but my choices were. Her mother brought water. Her father slid a box of tissues across the coffee table without a speech. That's an older man's love, tools within reach, space where words would bruise. Jessica cried softer, then quieter, then looked at the note again and didn't crumple it. The climax of this minute was not a scream. It was understanding, a heavy, adult kind that this wasn't a punishment. It was the bill coming due on a wish she'd spent. I disappeared without fists, without noise, just paperwork, signatures, and silence. She lost the house, the car, and the version of me that kept the lights on no matter what. What I kept was the only thing a man can't afford to sell: self-respect. If you've ever carried a mortgage on your back or worked Saturdays so someone else could sleep in, you know this truth. Some endings aren't accidents. They're justice, not revenge, not a tantrum. A measured door closing so another can open. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. It did. But hurt isn't a life plan. Dignity is. So here's the message I'm leaving with you, man to man. Some losses aren't accidents. They are justice. If you were in my boots, what would you do? Walk away clean or confront and try to fix what's already finished? Drop a comment with walk or confront and tell me why. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories. And if you think this is the end, wait until you hear what came next.